Mr. Dorsey, welcome. Thanks for being here. I want to read a few quotes about Twitter's practices, and I just want you to tell me if they're true or not. Social media is being rigged to censor conservatives. Is that true of Twitter?
No.
I don't know what Twitter is up to. It sure looks like to me that they're censoring people, and they ought to stop it. Are you censoring people?
No.
Twitter shadow banning prominent Republicans. Bad. Is that true?
No.
Enter the Twitter files. Over the past few weeks, journalists picked by Elon Musk have been given access to some of Twitter's internal systems and communications. Matt Taibbi is one of them.
They have a whole universe of stuff that they can do to any single account. They can dial it all the way down to you cannot be searched, all the way up to your account will not trend. Only people who follow you can see you. Even people who follow you won't see you unless they search.
While many groups have raised concerns over de-amplification, the central focus of the Twitter files is that Republicans were unfairly targeted. That is something Twitter has long denied.
It turns out that Twitter has been shadow banning conservatives the whole time, and yours truly has been a target. Take a look at what the creepy commissar of Twitter himself, Yoel Roth, the former head of trust and safety, had to say about permanently banning me from Twitter. We're putting up the screenshot now. We should just ban Gaetz. Working on that. Well, it doesn't quite fit anywhere, duh. But I'm trying to talk trust and safety into treating it as incitement.
Address the point directly of that you were secretly suppressing specific viewpoints, especially on the right.
I don't think that's what the Twitter files show. And I don't know that we've done a comprehensive analysis that demonstrates that these actions were skewed or biased one way or the other.
These things aren't random or done by accident. There is a purpose to the efforts of the regime to silence those who pose a threat.
Twitter initially suppressed the 2020 New York Post Hunter Biden laptop story, believing it could have been Russian disinformation. That decision is something former Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey says was a mistake. So too does Yoel Roth, Twitter's former head of trust and safety.
It is widely reported that I personally directed the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story. It is absolutely, unequivocally untrue.
But he was involved in internal conversations about it. The Twitter files show how staff at Twitter discussed and debated how to handle the Biden story.
We saw the first hints in communications between Twitter executives before the 2020 election, when we read things like flagged by DHS or please see attached report from FBI for potential misinformation. This would be attached to an Excel spreadsheet with a long list of names whose accounts were often suspended shortly after. Twitter, Facebook, Google, and other companies developed a formal system for taking in moderation requests from every corner of government, from the FBI, the DHS, the HHS, DOD, the Global Engagement Center at State, even the CIA. For every government agency scanning Twitter, there were perhaps 20 quasi-private entities doing the same thing, including Stanford's Election Integrity Partnership, NewsGuard, the Global Disinformation Index, and many others, many taxpayer-funded.
My bill, the Protecting Speech from Government Interference Act, makes this type of behavior an unlawful activity for federal officials to engage in, subjecting those who attempt to censor the lawful speech of Americans to disciplinary actions and monetary penalties. Federal officials, no matter their rank or resources, must be prohibited to coerce the private sector to suppress certain information or limit the ability of citizens to freely express their own views on a private sector internet platform.
My Republican colleagues claim that they've put this bill forward because the FBI somehow colluded with Twitter to suppress the New York Post article on the Hunter Biden laptop story, and which had absolutely no discernible impact on the availability of the article nor the outcome of the election.
We have seen the polls that said if Americans knew about the Hunter Biden laptop from hell, the election outcome would have been different, and y'all wanted that silenced so greatly. But who decides what is true or false? I certainly don't trust the federal government to make that distinction.
The whole judicial system is based on the difference between truth and lies. Our paid federal government agencies are trying to tell the social media when foreign malign actors like Russia and China and Iran are trying to interfere in our elections. That's what this is about.
The news you are getting should not be vetted
by the government. We want to make sure that in the future, when the government has a preferred opinion, be it on a potential president's relative, be it on a certain treatment for a disease, that the American public will be able to also get the other side of the story. Okay, the side of the story the government doesn't want you to know.
Documents revealed through a lawsuit against President Biden show that managing information on COVID vaccines was a near obsession in the Biden White House. White House Digital Director Robert Flaherty and his team lobbied to shut down or censor what they called misinformation, which often turned out to be true information, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all while getting paid with your tax dollars. Flaherty pointedly pressured Facebook to step up its game on shaping vaccine information and influencing users, such as promoting content from their friends who have been vaccinated. We have been focused on reducing the virality of content discouraging vaccines that does not contain actionable misinformation, Facebook assured the White House, noting this is often true content.
In another Facebook document, they say, quote, "The Surgeon General wants us to remove true information about side effects." Mr. Flaherty, should true information be removed?
Congressman, I can't speak to what they're...
Can't even speak to whether or not we should censor the truth because they don't like where it leads.
The White House was grappling with reports of dangerous blood clots after COVID shots, and the CDC and FDA had put a pause on Johnson & Johnson's version. That day, Flaherty wrote to Facebook that misinformation around the vaccine is a concern shared at the highest, and I mean highest, level of the White House.
When you say the highest, and I mean the highest levels of the White House, who are you referring to? Are you talking about President Biden?
Congressman, I don't think it should be a surprise that the administration was focused on the issue of presenting authoritative information
by the way,
about the
I
vaccine.
find your testimony terrifying, but incredibly intellectually honest. Because you've come here and you've taken the position, look, you know, in the White House, people are always trying to shape how information is received. They do it with the New York Times, you've seen it on the West Wing, and I think a lot of Americans see a distinction between powerful White House officials trying to shape a news story in the Washington Post and then trying to shape what all of America and the world can see in the digital information space. But you say there's no distinction there, and I think that's honest. It scares the hell out of me, but that seems to be your testimony, right?
Congressman, these platforms are making hundreds of millions of algorithmic editorial decisions a second. And those algorithmic decisions...
I get it. I just don't want the White House participating in them. I get that to have social media companies, there are all these decisions that get made about what content rises and falls. What we have a problem with is when the United States government is putting their thumb on the scale.
The Biden administration is facing fierce backlash for convening a group called the Disinformation Governance Board.
How are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Homeland Security recently rolled out the board, giving few details on how it will function, saying it will examine disinformation about threats, but will not have operational power and will not monitor U.S. citizens. Civil liberties advocates are questioning the idea.
Republicans grilled Secretary Mayorkas over its hiring of Mina Yankovic, the Disinformation Board's newly appointed leader, who went viral on TikTok for this.
Information laundering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origins are slightly less atrocious.
Was the department aware of her TikTok videos?
Senator,
They're really quite precocious.
Senator, I was not.
Did it know that she had said that Mr. Hunter Biden's laptop is Russian disinformation?
We never had any intention of censoring, but we, as any government agency does, look at social media to understand what is happening. I mean, the name is pretty bad, right? I think it evokes a lot of kind of, authoritarian vibes to it, and I understand why people would shiver when they heard it, but the idea of the name wasn't that it would be governing all of disinformation in the country. It was that it would be governing the department's response to disinformation.
So you may think, my friends on the other side of the aisle, that the real problem here are federal government officials. and you would be sorely mistaken. They are all trying to do their best.
Accountability matters. Our nation deserves nothing less than full transparency from federal officials working in the name of the American people. The American people have had enough of the swamp and its efforts to infuse authoritarianism into the fabric of American society.
That's why there was such a strong backlash the first time the Biden government tried to do this. Now we see documents where the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security is saying the real problem in our federal government is that we aren't using the national security apparatus to control truth, to try to disparage information that might be harmful to the Bidens. And the largest purveyor of disinformation is oftentimes the national security apparatus of our own government.
They've been building out basically mechanisms to proliferate a censorship industrial complex around the country to censor on a whole range of issues. And so you've seen this censorship industry go from, well, we're just fighting ISIS, to, well, we're just fighting Russian disinformation bots, to, well, now we need to fight domestic misinformation, which is just saying we need to fight against people who are saying things we disagree with online. That's all that means. I've never worked on an issue where so frequently while doing it, I just had chills go up my spine because of what I was seeing happening. I never thought in my own country that freedom of speech would be threatened in this way. And it's just frightening when you get into it.
And guess what? Follow the money. Part of the working relationship between the agencies and the research groups was funding that flowed by the millions in government grants. And each day it becomes clearer that between these three pillars, federal security agencies, media operators, and internet analysts, a new Washington revolving door has emerged to facilitate the same people moving between them and profiting from the scam.
They're quite proud of it. The answer is yes, we are creating this network, this web of academics and political and social elites to define the nature of truth, to shape what people are able to experience in the digital world. And you all ought to be very grateful for that. It's Orwellian. You ultimately have to defund it in order to drive any change.
I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens, and it's Kamala Harris saying she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation.
We will hold social media platforms accountable for the hate infiltrating their platforms because they have a responsibility to help fight against this threat to our democracy. If you act as a megaphone for misinformation or cyber warfare, if you don't police your platforms, we are going to hold you accountable as a community.
I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years.